I didn't fall in love with the monster when he saved my life. It wasn't when he pulled me off that diner floor 6 months ago. It wasn't when he handed me the deed to the foundation, or when he spent millions to erase my sister's name from the Viper hit list. It wasn't even in the silence of the car rides, where his presence felt like the only shield in a city of glass and knives. No. I fell in love with Sun Jun Kwan on a Tuesday, in the middle of a thunderstorm. I walked into my apartment, not his fortress, but the small, drafty place I refused to leave, and found the deadliest man in the city sitting cross-legged on my rug. My 14-year-old sister, Nia, was pointing a pink eraser at him like a weapon. "You forgot to carry the X, June," she sighed. "It's a variable." He was staring at her 9th grade algebra textbook with more fear than I'd ever seen him show a loaded gun. His hand, the same hand that had dismantled the Viper syndicate and broken men without blinking, was gripping a yellow number 2 pencil so hard the wood was cracking. "The logic is flawed," he muttered, his brow furrowed. "It makes no strategic sense." "It's math, not an ambush," Nia said, rolling her eyes. I stood in the doorway, my umbrella dripping cold rain onto the floor, watching the king of the underworld lose a fight to a quadratic equation. I watched the tension leave his shoulders. I watched the mask slip. And I realized he wasn't just guarding our lives anymore. He was trying to learn how to live one. I smiled, thinking we had finally won. Thinking we had built a wall high enough to keep the blood out. I was naive. Because 6 hours later, a body would hit the back door of my community center. And I would learn the hard way that in this city, peace isn't a victory. It's just the time it takes for your enemies to reload. The umbrella dripped a steady rhythm onto the welcome mat, a cold metronome marking time in the hallway. I didn't move to close it. I just stood there, gripping the handle, staring into my own living room as if I had walked into the wrong life. My apartment was small, drafty in the winter, stifling in the summer, with a radiator that clanked like a dying engine. It was miles away from the penthouse fortress Sun Jun Kwan called home. Yet, there he was, the most feared man in the city, sitting cross-legged on my fraying rug, defeated by a 9th grade algebra textbook. "It's a variable, June," Nia said, pointing a pink eraser at him with the authority of a general. "You can't just intimidate X into being a number." Jun Kwan stared at the page, his jaw set in that familiar, granite line he usually reserved for rival warlords or federal indictments. He wore a black t-shirt that stretched tight across his shoulders, revealing the ink creeping up his neck, and his leather jacket lay discarded on the armchair like a shed skin. In his hand, a hand I had seen break a man's wrist without a tremor, a yellow pencil looked absurdly fragile. "The logic is flawed," he grumbled, erasing a line with too much force, wrinkling the paper. "If X is unknown, we should isolate the threat. Not divide by it." "It's not a threat, it's a slope," Nia groaned, dropping her head onto the coffee table. "Boosie, please tell him math isn't a turf war." I felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth, sharp and sudden. This was the moment. Not the grand rescue in the diner, not the millions he poured into the foundation, not the security detail he posted outside my sister's school. It was this. The quiet, humiliating effort of a man shaped by violence trying to learn the language of peace for a 14-year-old girl. He looked up then, sensing my presence before I even stepped off the mat. The frustration vanished from his eyes, replaced by a dark, simmering warmth that hit me harder than the bourbon he drank. He didn't look at me like a prize he had won or a victim he had saved. He looked at me like I was the only solid ground in his spinning world. "She is stubborn," he said, gesturing to Nia with the pencil. "Like her sister." "She's right, though," I said, dropping my bag and walking into the warmth of the room. You can't force the answer. I sat beside him, our knees brushing. The contact sent a jolt through me, electric and terrifying. I realized then that I loved him. And with that realization came a cold, sinking dread. Because in our world, love wasn't a gift. It was a target. Junquan tossed the pencil onto the table, his eyes locking onto mine, reading the shift in my mood. The domestic bubble shimmered, fragile as glass. "You're late," he said softly, his voice dropping to that low register that meant business. "Did something happen at the center?" "No," I lied, reaching for his hand to stop him from reaching for his phone. "Just rain." But as I held his scarred knuckles, the wind howled outside, slamming against the windowpane like a fist, reminding us both that the storm wasn't over. It was just waiting for us to get comfortable. The Nolo Community Foundation smelled of sawdust and fresh paint, a sharp improvement over the mildew and despair that used to cling to this block. I walked through the main hall, the click of my heels on the polished concrete cutting through the din of construction drills and children's laughter. 6 months ago, I would have been invisible here, just another face in the crowd waiting for a handout. Now, the room parted for me like a receding tide. "Ms. Nolo," my assistant, Sarah, whispered, falling into step beside me, clutching a clipboard like a shield. "Mr. Garris is in your office. He's unhappy about the contract revision." "Unhappy is a negotiating tactic, Sarah," I said, not breaking stride. "Panic is a result. Let's see which one he's feeling." I pushed open the frosted glass door. Garris, a contractor with a neck thicker than his head and a cheap suit that strained at the buttons, didn't stand up. He was leaning back in my chair, tapping a gold pen against my mahogany desk, looking at the ceiling tiles like he was appraising a teardown. "You're late, sweetheart," Garris grunted, not bothering to look at me. "I got crews waiting. Time is money, and this little charity project of yours is bleeding both." I walked around the desk, picked up the invoice he had thrown there, and read it in silence. He had added a 30% markup on the HVAC units. He thought I was just a waitress who got lucky. He thought the money behind me was dumb, endless, and blind. He was wrong. "Get out of my chair," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was flat, cold, and stripped of any waitress politeness. Garris blinked, the pen freezing in mid-air. He laughed, a nervous, hacking sound. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." I leaned against the file cabinet, crossing my arms. "You quoted 40,000 for the units. This invoice says 52. You think because the funding comes from private sources, we don't check the math? You think I don't know the difference between a wholesale markup and theft?" "Market fluctuations," Garris stammered, finally standing up, his face flushing red. "Supply chain issues. You don't understand how this business works, Boosie." "Ms. Nolo," I corrected. I took a step forward, channeling the terrifying stillness I had watched Junquan use on captains of industry and cartel bosses alike. "Here is how this business works, Mr. Garris. You have 1 hour to reprint this invoice with the original quote. If you don't, I will blacklist your company from every development project in a 10-mile radius. And given who backs this foundation, you know I have the reach to do it." Garris opened his mouth to argue, looked into my eyes, and stopped. He didn't see the girl who served coffee anymore. He saw the shadow of the monster standing behind me. The arrogance drained out of him, replaced by the primitive urge to flee. I'll check the numbers," he muttered, grabbing his briefcase and brushing past me, sweating despite the air conditioning. I closed the door, the click of the latch echoing in the sudden silence. My hands were steady, but my heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had won. I commanded respect. I wielded power like a blade. But as I looked out the window at the darkening street, watching the rain begin to streak the glass, I realized that every time I used Junquan's methods, I lost a little more of the woman I used to be. I sat down, exhaling a breath I had held for 10 minutes, when a heavy thud sounded from the back delivery entrance. It wasn't a delivery. It was the sound of dead weight hitting metal. The silence in the loading dock was absolute, the kind of heavy, pressurized quiet that usually precedes a disaster. I stood frozen, my hand hovering over the alarm keypad, listening. The rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof, a relentless drumroll that masked everything else. Then it happened again. Thud. It wasn't the wind. It was wet, heavy, and deliberate, like a sack of wet cement thrown against the steel security door. I didn't call the police. In this zip code, dialing 911 was a suggestion, not a solution. I didn't call Junquan either, my independence was still a new, fragile thing I wasn't ready to surrender. Instead, I grabbed the heavy mag light from the emergency kit and walked toward the sound. My heart beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a sharp contrast to the cool, professional mask I had worn with Garrus. I unlocked the heavy steel bar, the mechanism groaning in protest, and pushed the door open just enough to see into the alley. The storm rushed in, cold and biting, carrying the smell of ozone and dumpster rot. At first, I saw nothing but the slick, black asphalt and the overflowing bins. Then, the pile of rags at my feet groaned. I jumped back, swinging the light down. It wasn't rags. It was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 16. He was curled in a fetal ball, shivering violently in the mud. His clothes, expensive streetwear that looked out of place in this alley, were shredded. His face was a ruin. One eye was swollen shut, the size of a plum, and his lip was split so badly I could see teeth through the gap. "Oh God," I whispered, dropping the flashlight to my side and falling to my knees in the water. "Hey. Can you hear me?" I reached out to touch his shoulder, but he flinched, letting out a guttural whimper of pure terror. He scrambled backward, his boots skidding on the wet pavement, trying to put distance between us despite his injuries. "It's okay," I said, raising my hands, palms out. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm Boosie. You're safe here." "No safe," he rasped, the words bubbling up through blood and spit. He coughed, clutching his ribs. "Nowhere safe." I scanned the alley. It was empty. Whoever had done this, whoever had beaten a child within an inch of his life and dumped him like trash, was gone. But the malice lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. "I need to get you inside," I said, moving closer, ignoring the ruin of my silk blouse as I knelt in the grime. "I need to call an ambulance." "No cops." He grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong, driven by adrenaline and panic. His good eye was wide, frantic, darting around the shadows. "No cops. They'll finish it." "Who?" I asked, leaning in close to hear him over the rain. "Who did this to you?" The boy looked at me, trembling so hard his teeth chattered. He pulled me closer, his bloody fingers staining my skin, and whispered the one name that could shatter the world I had just started to build. "Son," he choked out. "Son Junquan's men." I dragged him into the custodial closet, the only room without windows, and locked the door. The smell of bleach and mop water was suffocating, but it was better than the exposure of the main hall. I hoisted him onto the metal work table, his groans echoing in the small space as I tore open the emergency first aid kit. "Stay still," I ordered, my hands shaking as I soaked a gauze pad in saline. "I need to see how deep this is." The boy hissed through his teeth as the antiseptic hit his skin. Under the harsh fluorescent bulb, he looked even younger than he had in the alley. 16, maybe 17. His face was a map of purple and red, swelling rapidly, but beneath the ruin, there was a softness to his features that hadn't been hardened by the streets yet. "Your boyfriend," he spat, blood flecking his chin. "Tell your boyfriend he missed." "He didn't do this," I said, focusing on a jagged cut above his eyebrow. "Junquan doesn't beat children." "He does when they cross the line," the boy rasped, his good eye fixing me with a look of pure hatred. "He sent his dogs. They used the bats. The ones with the wire." My stomach turned. I knew those bats. I had seen them in the trunk of a car once, years ago. But Junquan swore he had burned that part of his life down when he built the foundation. Doubt, cold and insidious, began to creep into my chest. I moved to his neck, where the mud was thickest, hiding what looked like a nasty abrasion. I scrubbed gently, the water in the basin turning a murky pink. The dirt gave way, revealing pale skin, bruised and tender. And ink. I froze. It wasn't just a bruise. It was a tattoo, fresh and black, inked right over the carotid artery. A coiled serpent with jagged fangs. A viper. My breath hitched. In this city, you didn't get that ink unless you were blood in, blood out. But this wasn't the crude scratch work of a street soldier. The lines were precise, the design intricate. It was a crest. I stepped back, the bloody gauze dropping from my fingers. I looked at the boy's face again, really looked at him this time. The set of his jaw. The arch of his brow. The memory hit me like a physical blow. 6 months ago. The rain-slicked curb outside Lincoln High. The man in the hooded raincoat reaching for Nia's wrist. The man whose eyes had held the same cold, entitled fury this boy was staring at me with now. "You're not just a viper," I whispered, the air leaving the room. The boy smirked, a broken, bloody expression that chilled me to the bone. "And you're not just a waitress anymore, are you?" He was the son of Victor, the viper boss. The man who had ordered the hit on my sister. The man who would burn this entire city to the ground to get his heir back. I wasn't treating a patient. I was holding a lit match in a room full of gasoline. And outside, I heard the distinctive, heavy rumble of an engine idling at the back door. The heavy steel door swung open, but it wasn't the vipers who stepped into the fluorescent glare of the utility closet. It was Minho. Junquan's second-in-command was usually the bridge between his boss's violence and my reality, the one who brought me coffee, checked the perimeter of the foundation, and made jokes about his mother's cooking. But tonight, the man standing in the doorway wasn't my friend. He was a soldier. Rain dripped from the brim of his cap, obscuring his eyes, but I saw the shift in his posture the moment he looked past me. He didn't see a battered child. He saw a threat. "Move, Boosie." His voice was terrifyingly calm. In one fluid motion, he drew a suppressed pistol from his jacket, leveling it at the boy cowering on the metal table behind me. "Minho, don't," I said, stepping directly into his line of fire. "You don't know what that is," Minho said, not lowering the weapon. The muzzle was aimed squarely at my chest, though his eyes were locked on the boy over my shoulder. "That is Victor's blood. That is a spy. He's a child." I shouted, spreading my arms to shield the trembling teenager. He's beaten half to death. He came here for help. He came here to mark the target, Minho snapped, his patience fraying. This is war, Boosie. We don't nurse the enemy back to health so they can burn us down later. Step aside. I will make it quick. Behind me, the boy whimpered, a sound of pure, animalistic fear. I could feel the heat of his body radiating against my back, the frantic thrum of his survival instinct. No, I said, my voice steady despite the gun pointed at my heart. Not here. Not in this building. Minho's jaw tightened. Do not test me. Junquan gave me orders to protect this place. Eliminating him is protection. This place is neutral ground. I took a step forward, forcing Minho to take a half step back or risk the gun touching me. I built this foundation to stop the bleeding, not to add to it. If you pull that trigger, you aren't protecting anything. You're just another thug defiling my floor. Minho hesitated. For a second, I thought he might do it anyway, push me aside and finish the job. The calculation played out in his dark eyes, the duty to his clan versus the untouchable status I held in Junquan's life. If he hurt me, Junquan would kill him. If he let the boy live, Victor might kill them all. Slowly, agonizingly, he lowered the weapon. You are making a mistake, he whispered, the silence in the room heavier than the gunshot would have been. Mercy is a weakness they will exploit. It's not weakness, I said, my breath shaking as the adrenaline crashed. It's humanity. Try it sometime. Minho holstered the gun, but his expression didn't soften. He reached for his radio, his gaze cold and detached. I won't kill him, he said, turning his back on me to guard the door. But I just called Junquan. And when he gets here, he won't be asking for permission. The silence that followed Minho's call was shattered not by a scream, but by the quiet click of the latch. The door swung open, and Son Junquan stepped into the cramped utility closet. He didn't look like the man who had struggled with algebra on my living room floor. He looked like a storm front given human form. He was soaked, his leather jacket heavy with rain, his face a mask of terrifying neutrality. He looked at Minho, who immediately holstered his weapon and stepped back, then at me. His gaze swept over my blood-stained blouse, checking for wounds that belonged to me. Finding none, he turned his attention to the boy shivering on the metal table. Son, the boy hissed, pressing his back against the cinder block wall, his eyes wide with hatred. Come to watch. Junquan didn't answer. He stepped into the light, ignoring the boy's venom, and reached out. The boy flinched violently, expecting a blow, but Junquan simply gripped the boy's chin, forcing his head to the side. He wasn't looking at the viper tattoo. He was looking at the shoulder, where the shirt had been torn away to reveal a hideous, purple-black bruise patterned with a distinct, diamond-shaped lattice. Junquan froze. His eyes narrowed, the clinical detachment cracking for a fraction of a second. He released the boy and leaned in closer to inspect a second blow across the ribs. The pattern was identical. Jagged, tearing the skin in a specific, rhythmic way. Wire, Junquan said softly. It wasn't a question. Your dogs, the boy spat, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. They used the wire bats. They said it was a receipt from the king. Junquan straightened slowly, wiping his hand on his jeans. He looked at Minho. We destroyed the wire bats 3 years ago. The night we opened the foundation. I gave the order myself. You did, Minho confirmed, his face pale in the harsh light. No one in the ranks carries them. It is a firing offense. Then who? I asked, looking between them, the cold dread in my stomach turning into nausea. Someone who knows our history better than our current operations, Junquan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. He looked back at the boy, seeing for the first time not an enemy, but a prop in a theater production. This wasn't a beating. It was a forgery. He paced the small room, the energy coming off him making the air feel thin. Someone dressed men in my colors. They used weapons associated with my past brutality. They left marks on Victor's son that act as a signature. A frame-up, I whispered. To start a war. To ensure a massacre, Junquan corrected. He stopped pacing and looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked trapped. Victor won't care that I didn't order it. He sees his son broken with my trademark. He won't ask questions, Boosie. He will just burn everything I touch. He looked at the boy, then at the door leading to the foundation's main hall. And right now, he said, you are holding the match. Minho hauled the boy out of the closet, half carrying him toward the secure holding room in the basement. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving us alone in the sudden, ringing silence of the utility room. The smell of bleach and old blood hung in the air between us. I leaned against the metal shelving, my arms crossed over my chest, bracing myself. I waited for the explosion. I waited for him to tell me I was naive, that I had endangered everything he built, that my stubborn morality was a liability he couldn't afford. Junquan didn't shout. He didn't pace. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his damp leather jacket. You disobeyed a direct standing order regarding Foundation security, he said, his voice quiet, devoid of the anger I expected. I know, I replied, holding his gaze. And I'd do it again. He studied me for a long moment, the fluorescent light casting harsh shadows across the exhaustion etched into his face. Then, he pulled out a small, rectangular box. It was black velvet, the kind usually reserved for diamond bracelets or apologies made of gold. He held it out to me. I hesitated. If that's a ring, June, I swear. It's not a ring, he interrupted softly. Open it. I took the box. It was heavy. I lifted the lid, expecting jewels, but instead found cold, hard pragmatism. Inside rested a sleek, unbranded satellite phone and a single, heavy iron key that looked old enough to open a dungeon. The phone is encrypted, he explained, stepping closer. It has one number programmed, the pilot of a helicopter on standby at the airfield. The key opens a safe house in the mountains, 3 hours north. It is off the grid. No digital footprint. No one knows it exists except me. And now you. I stared at the objects. They weren't gifts, they were an escape hatch. You want me to run? I whispered, the velvet soft against my callous fingertips. I want you to have the choice, he corrected, reaching out to tuck a stray curl behind my ear, his touch lingering on my cheek. Victor isn't just coming for territory, Boosie. He thinks I tortured his son. He is coming for blood. He is coming for the things I value most. He leaned his forehead against mine, his eyes closing briefly, stripping away the mask of the warlord to reveal the terrified man beneath. I cannot promise you peace, he murmured, his breath warm against my skin. I cannot stop the fire that is about to burn this city down. But I promise you will survive the war. I'm not leaving you, I said, my voice shaking. You might have to, he said, pulling back to look at me with a desperate intensity. Because when Victor finds out we have his son, he won't send negotiators. He'll send an army. As if summoned by his words, the encrypted phone in the box buzzed violently against my palm. A single text message flashed across the screen from an unknown number. Burn it all. The text message on the satellite phone hadn't even faded when the lobby was washed in a strobe of red and blue light. Sirens didn't wail, they chirped, sharp and aggressive, cutting through the drumming rain. Police, Minho said, checking the monitors. 3 cruisers. Unmarked sedan. They moved too fast. They were waiting, Junquan said, his hand resting on his weapon. They aren't here to arrest us, Busi. They're here to flush the game. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I walked to the glass doors of the foundation, smoothed my blood-stained blouse, and unlocked the deadbolt. Detective Kincaid pushed the door open before I could step back. He was a man who smelled of stale coffee and compromise, wearing a badge that gave him the authority to ruin lives and the arrogance to enjoy it. He didn't look at me, he looked past me, scanning the hallway for targets. Step aside, Ms. Nolo, Kincaid barked. We have a report of a kidnapping in progress. We are clearing the building. There is no kidnapping, I said, planting my feet. I didn't block him with force, I blocked him with presence. This is a private community center. Do you have a warrant? Kincaid laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Probable cause beats a warrant tonight. We know the cloth boy is here. Hand him over, and maybe I don't book you as an accessory to gang warfare. The boy you're looking for is a minor, I said, my voice ringing off the high ceilings. He arrived here beaten unconscious. He is currently receiving emergency medical aid. Removing him now would be negligent homicide. Don't play lawyer with me, waitress, Kincaid sneered, stepping into my personal space. You're harboring a fugitive. I am sheltering a victim. I shouted back, matching his volume. And I know the law, detective. Under the Good Samaritan statutes, I have a duty of care. Unless you have a paramedic unit out there, nobody touches him. Kincaid's hand dropped to his baton, his eyes narrowing. You think playing hero makes you untouchable? You're just a gangster's girlfriend playing house. And you, Junquan's voice cut through the air like a razor, are sweating. Junquan stepped out of the shadows. He didn't draw his gun. He didn't have to. He just stood there, radiating a lethal calm that made the 2 uniformed officers behind Kincaid take a nervous step back. Why are you sweating, detective? Junquan asked softly. It's cold outside. Kincaid flinched. He glanced toward the street. Through the rain-slicked glass, past the flashing cruiser lights, I saw them. 2 black SUVs idling at the curb. No lights. No sirens. Just dark tint and the silhouette of men waiting for a delivery. The realization hit me like ice water. Kincaid wasn't here to arrest the boy. He was here to evict him. He was here to drag the Viper Air out onto the sidewalk so the men in the SUVs could finish what the Wirebats had started. You aren't the police, I whispered, looking at Kincaid with disgust. You're the butcher's delivery boy. I slammed my hand against the maglock button on the wall. The bolts crashed home, sealing the glass doors, locking Kincaid and his officers inside with us. What do you think you're doing? Kincaid roared, reaching for his holster. I'm keeping the peace, I said, backing toward Junquan. Nobody leaves. Nobody enters. If the Vipers want him, they're going to have to come through the glass. The standoff didn't end with a bang. It ended with the terrifying, hydraulic hiss of the maglocks disengaging. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent lobby. Detective Kincaid flinched, his hand tightening on his baton, but the moment for bluster had passed. I didn't look at him. I looked through the rain-streaked glass, past the flashing lights of the cruiser, directly at the black SUV idling at the curb like a hearse waiting for a body. "If you want him," I yelled, my voice cracking against the glass before I pushed the door open, "come and get him." "But I'm walking him out." I grabbed the boy's arm. He was trembling, a vibration that traveled through his soaked shirt and into my own skin. He leaned heavily on me, smelling of antiseptic and fear. Jun Kwan flanked me instantly, his body a tense, coiled spring. His weapon was drawn but held low against his thigh, shielded from the streetlights. "Busi," Jun Kwan murmured, his voice a low rumble of warning. "Once we cross the threshold, there is no cover." "I know," I whispered. "Keep walking." We moved as a phalanx, the mob boss, the waitress, and the broken air, past the stunned detective, past the corrupt uniforms who watched us with greedy, uncertain eyes, and out into the storm. The wind hit us instantly, biting and cold, plastering my hair to my face. The rain was blinding, turning the world into a blur of neon and gray. The lead SUV's engine was a deep, thrumming growl that vibrated in the pavement beneath my feet. The rear window rolled down with an electric hum. Victor Clough sat in the shadow of the backseat. He didn't look at his son's bruised face. He didn't look at Jun Kwan, his rival of a decade. He looked at me. His eyes were pale, predatory, and entirely devoid of gratitude. They were the eyes of a man who measured the world in assets and liabilities. "He was framed," I said, shouting over the wind. "Someone used wire bats to make you think it was Jun Kwan. I stitched him up. I stood between him and the police who wanted to sell him out. I am returning him to you as a gesture of peace." Victor's gaze flicked to the boy, assessing the bandages, the swelling, the terror. "Is this true?" The boy nodded frantically, clutching his ribs where I had taped them. She locked the doors, Dad. The cops were going to give me to the guys in the sedan. She stopped them." Victor looked back at me. For a long, agonizing second, the only sound was the rain hissing against the hot engine block. He was assessing me. Not as a waitress. Not as a nuisance. But as something new. Something he hadn't accounted for in his war against Jun Kwan. "You have a dangerous amount of courage, Ms. Nolo," Victor said softly, his voice cutting through the storm. "It makes people follow you." "Take your son," I said, pushing the boy gently toward the car. "And go." The door opened. The boy scrambled inside, disappearing into the safety of the leather interior. Victor didn't say thank you. He didn't offer a truce. He simply nodded to his driver, a microscopic dip of his chin, and the window rolled up, sealing them away in their bulletproof world. The SUV pulled away from the curb, merging into the dark city traffic, its red taillights blurring into streaks of blood in the rain. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for a lifetime. I turned to Jun Kwan, shivering as the adrenaline crashed, leaving my knees weak. I saw the tension finally leaving his shoulders. He holstered his weapon. "We did it," I whispered, grabbing his hand. "We chose peace." I turned back toward the warmth of the foundation, ready to go home. I didn't know I was already a ghost. Inside the hermetically sealed warmth of the Mercedes, the silence was absolute. Victor Clough didn't look at his son, who was weeping softly in relief. He watched the rearview mirror. He saw Busi Nolo turn away. He saw the way she stood, unbroken, defiant, flanked by the deadliest man in the city. He saw a woman who could command a warlord, checkmate the police, and hold a lobby against armed men. She wasn't a civilian. She wasn't a pawn. She was a kingmaker. And in this city, kingmakers were the most dangerous pieces on the board. As long as she lived, Sun Jun-kwan had a conscience. As long as she lived, his enemy was stronger than him. Victor picked up his phone. The line clicked open instantly. "Did you get the boy?" the voice on the other end asked. "I have him," Victor said, his voice quiet, cold, and absolute. "Now, clear the board." The woman. Victor watched the glowing lights of the foundation fade into the distance. He saw the shadow of Busi Nolo walking through the glass doors. He didn't blink. "Burn it," he ordered. "Burn it to the ground. With her inside." Mercy is a fatal error in the city. Subscribe for more videos.